Just think about that for a second. All of the research, all of the brilliant analysis you do to find that perfect company, it can all be completely wiped out by one simple, often overlooked decision. This is the profound, counterintuitive problem right at the heart of managing a portfolio. All right, let's get into it. Today, we're breaking down an absolutely masterful piece by Jocelyn Dubé called Position Sizing: The Final Act of Conviction. And the core argument is powerful. Sizing isn't just another decision. It is the decision that turns your analysis into actual returns. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with exactly why sizing is so critical. Then, we'll lay out a functional architecture for a portfolio. From there, we'll dive into a hierarchy of conviction, identify the common errors most investors make, and finally, look at a disciplined cycle to fix them. Okay, Section 1, the sizing imperative. The entire world of investment analysis is built to answer one question: what to buy? But what this piece argues so compellingly is that the forgotten question, how much to own, is what really truly determines your financial outcome. And it all comes down to this core principle. It looks simple, but it's incredibly important. Your portfolio's return isn't just an average of how your stocks did. No, it's a weighted average. And that's not some small detail. It is the central, unyielding math of investing. The weight is the one variable you control the most, and yet it's the one we neglect most often. And look at this. It illustrates the point perfectly. You've got two investors. They own the exact same 5 stocks with the exact same returns. But Investor A puts a 40% weight on her best idea and makes almost 15%. Investor B puts that same 40% weight on his worst idea, and he loses money. Same stocks. The only difference? Position size. It is the decisive variable. Okay, so if sizing is that powerful, then it demands a really intentional approach. And that brings us to our next section: how to design a portfolio's correct architecture. We're talking about a deliberate framework where every single holding has a specific job to do. And here's what that architecture looks like. See, it's not just a random collection of tickers. It's 4 very distinct categories, each with its own purpose and its own target weight range. You have cash, the index, your core compounders, and your more speculative amplifiers. What's absolutely crucial here is to understand their specific roles. Cash isn't just sitting there doing nothing. It's a permanent option on future opportunity. The index, well, that's your humility. It guarantees you participate in the market's biggest winners. Your compounders, those are your high-conviction, wealth-generating engines. And the amplifiers, those are small, controlled bets on potentially explosive outcomes. So this brings us right to the core operational question. Inside that compounder category, how do you decide which business gets a 5% allocation and which one gets 10%? The answer lies in creating a clear hierarchy of conviction. And who better to learn from on this than Charlie Munger? His point is brutally clear. If you've done the work to actually rank your ideas, then weighting them all equally is just intellectually dishonest. You're basically pretending that your very best idea is no better than your 7th best. This table shows you exactly how that gradient works in practice. It's a direct translation of business quality into capital allocation. A business with, say, an irreplaceable moat and an expanding runway, that earns an 8 to 10% weight. On the other end, a business with a replicable edge has to justify its very existence in your portfolio, or you sell it. And how do you make that judgment? Well, you use these 4 calibration criteria. First, how wide is the company's competitive moat? Second, how high and how durable is its return on invested capital? Third, what does its runway for growth look like? And finally, what are the specific undiversifiable risks that it faces? Now here's the thing. When sizing isn't deliberate, it becomes accidental. And accidental sizing leads to a set of very predictable and very destructive errors, or as they're called here, pathologies. Let's walk through the 5 most common ones. So the first one is inversion. This is simply when your portfolio's weights directly contradict your own analysis. You believe deeply in Company A, but for whatever reason, maybe just historical accident, Company B, which you're not so sure about, has a much larger position. Next up is drift. This one's sneaky. A position you started at 5% triples in price, and now it's a 12 or 15% position. Now, that feels like success, right? But what's really happened is your portfolio's risk profile has changed dramatically, and you never made a conscious decision to let it happen. Then there's fragmentation. This is what happens when you own, say, 30 different stocks at just 1 or 2% each. No single position has enough weight to meaningfully impact your returns. Your best ideas are completely diluted by this long tail of tiny positions that just add noise. The opposite of fragmentation is accidental concentration. This is when one massive winner grows to become 25, 30, maybe even 40% of your portfolio. Now, the danger isn't the concentration itself. It's that it was unconsidered. You never deliberately chose to accept that level of single stock risk. And finally, we have the subtlest pathology of all, false equality. This is where you size all your best ideas at, let's say, 5% each. On the surface, it looks disciplined, but it's really just an avoidance of conviction. You've done the hard work to know that some of these businesses are better than others, but you refuse to act on that conclusion. So how do you fix these structural problems? Well, the solution has to be structural too. And that brings us to our final section, the corrective capital cycle. This is the virtuous cycle in action. First, you systematically harvest gains from your speculative amplifiers after they've had a big run-up. Second, you liberate that capital. And third, this is the key, you deploy it by averaging up into your highest conviction, highest quality compounders, constantly strengthening your portfolio's core. Now, this goes directly against a really common instinct. The flawed emotional reflex is to average down, to throw more money at what's cheap or what's fallen. But the disciplined and correct approach is to average up. You add capital to what is excellent. You're not buying a more expensive stock, you're increasing your ownership in a more valuable business. And we'll leave it with this fantastic quote from Joel Greenblatt because it just perfectly captures the absurdity of it all. Spending all your time on what to buy while completely ignoring how much to buy, it's the one decision that validates all the others. To explore these investment strategies further and discover more from the collection, visit the website averagingup.com.